In this video, you will learn everything you need to get a decent score on your SAT essay. Don't worry if you have been procrastinating on your SAT essay prep. This is really everything you need to get a pretty good score. And I even have a recent example from my practice. Many of you know that I work as a tutor, and a family that I'm very good friends with brought another family, and they had a son who was taking the SAT in the 12th grade on December 1st. And they really asked me to work with David, and they couldn't find anybody else. They heard so many things. I agreed. We had about 3 weeks. The exam was on December 1st, and they came to me at the beginning of November. Do not do this. I do not recommend it. But David was pretty weak in many areas. He was weak in math, he was weak in reading, and I tried to work with him on things that would bring his score up the most, like the quadratics and the linear equations, stuff like that. So we only had one session that we spent on the essay. And he asked me if I could give him a formula. And I said, what are you talking about? It's an essay. And he said, no, Katya, you know, I'm going to be taking the multiple choice test for 3-something hours. Then you want me to write a creative essay in 50 minutes? Really? I won't be able to do that unless I have a formula. So I thought about it, and I created a formula. And we plugged that formula into an outline, and guess what he received? His score was 878. David's score on the SAT was the highest section of his SAT. And even though it's illegal for me to share his essay with you, it's not illegal to share the lesson that I created for David. So let's see if this formula is going to work for you. I'm Kat Severson. I'm the inventor of the Severson method, a scientifically proven way to learn anything fast, including the SAT essay. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is the prompt. Many people, when they hear the word essay, they're thinking about the creative essay, where they have to agree or disagree, where they have to build the argument. This is not the essay that the SAT or the College Board is asking you to write. This essay is called a rhetorical analysis essay. What you will have to do is you will have to read a passage. The passage is anywhere between 650 to 750 words. It's a long passage. Within that passage, you're going to be given the name of the passage, the publishing date, and the author's name. You're going to see an argument. Not in the sense that the author is going to be arguing with someone, but in the sense that the author is going to be trying to persuade you as a reader and is going to try to make a point. What you're going to do is you're going to identify what he's arguing and then look at this passage through the lens of a literature professor. You're going to identify some rhetorical devices, you're going to identify pieces of evidence, and you're going to write about his craft. This is called rhetorical reading and rhetorical analysis. And you're going to be looking for rhetorical devices. If you're going to be using the word rhetorical in your essay, make sure you know how to spell it. There's an H hidden in there, R-H, rhetorical. Don't even get me started why this H is in there. I love the Old English, but I don't understand why we have to keep writing in this Old English. Just make sure your punctuation and your spelling is on point in order to get a good score, because you're also scored on your writing skills. So a little bit about the prompt. It's always going to be the same. So read it once. If you want to, I can read it for you. So the prompt is going to sound like this. As you read the passage below, consider how Christopher Hitchens, that's the name of the author of this particular passage, I have taken this from test 6, uses evidence, such as facts or examples, to support claims, reasoning to develop ideas or to connect claims and evidence, stylistic or persuasive elements, such as word choice, or appeals to emotion, to add power to the ideas expressed. Do not spend time reading this. I read this to you. You know what this is going to say. Then there's going to be the second box, which will have a little bit more about the prompt. I will tell you what we do need from the second box as we go along. But these are the two things about the prompt. It's always going to be the same, and you don't need to read it. And the second thing is, please do not express your own opinion. Please follow the rules and analyze the author's argument rather than write your own opinion about what you think about this. Now, let's talk about how the essay is scored. Many of you heard my story with David that he scored 878. What does that even mean? How do you get 878? How do you get 888? How do you get 777? And what is the score that I need? The score that you need if you're applying for a very competitive school, you need a 21 or above total. So 8 plus 7 plus 8 is going to give you, good job, 23. So anything above a 21 is a great score. But anywhere starting at 19 and 20, you're in good hands. The reason you need to write this essay in a controlled environment is because many schools are looking to prove that the personal statement essay was written by you and not by your literature professor or your tutor. So many schools require it, and because you're watching this video, I'm just going to assume you need to take the SAT essay because your school requires it. Now, how is it scored? It's going to be scored by 2 graders. The reason there are 2, and sometimes there's even 3, is because this scoring process needs to be standardized. I don't know how it is for you guys, but I feel that when I'm writing my essays, sometimes the grading could get very personal. Let's say the professor likes me or agrees with my ideas, I'm going to get a higher score, and I'm going to get a lower score if I'm being very controversial with my teacher. This has been taken out of the equation here. You cannot get points for being clever. You cannot get points for the grader agreeing with you or disagreeing with you. This is a very unbiased grading process. You're going to be graded in 3 categories. In order to remember the categories, just remember the acronym RAW. R-A-W, RAW. Reading, analysis, and writing. So in each category, each grader can give you a score from 1 to 4. So if both graders considered your reading of the passage brilliant, they're both going to give you a 4. If they both consider your analysis, the depth of your analysis, a 4, they're going to give you a 4. So the total is 8. And 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24. That's the maximum score. But if one of the scorers thinks that your writing ability is a 2, and then the second scorer considers your writing ability to be a 4, there is a discrepancy of over 1. They usually don't recheck the essay if one of the graders gives a 3 and another one gives a 4. One gives a 2, another one gives a 3. But if the discrepancy, if the gap between one and the other is more than 1, there is a third grader that will come in and grade your essay in all fairness. I don't know how often that happens. Usually there are components that graders are going to look for, and your job and my job is to give them those components. Because don't think that your essay is going to be read through thoroughly for over 10 minutes because you've written more than 2.5 pages. No, they're going to look at it, they're going to be looking for key components. When they find those key components, they're going to give you a good score. Think about the thousands of essays that the College Board needs to check. So these are the parameters: reading, analysis, and writing, and on each you can get a 4 from each grader. Now, let's do this. Let's talk about how you're going to be spending your precious 50 minutes as you are reading the passage, creating an outline, writing the 2.5 or more pages. How are you going to spend your time? First and foremost, human beings are absolutely terrible at estimating how much time has passed. So make sure you practice writing the essay at least once and that you bring a watch with you. Especially when you're writing and thinking, the sense of time has been shut off. If you're not looking at a clock, it's going to be really difficult for you to tell time, especially because our internal ability to tell time has been compromised. You know that we have the biological clock, but you're tired, you're exhausted, you've taken a gazillion of multiple choice questions. Your biological clock is not working. So make sure you time yourself. Here is what I want you to do. Come over and I'm going to show you exactly what to do. So remember we said about the prompt is going to be the same, then you're going to see a passage. And then there's going to be the second box. Inside of the second box, there's a key component. Remember the 3 categories you are scored on: raw, reading, analysis, and writing. In order to show to the graders that your reading is on point, you need to identify the main issue that the author is arguing. And the author argues, and it's right here, usually in the second line, write an essay in which you explain how Christopher Hitchens built an argument to persuade his audience that the original Parthenon sculptures should be returned to Greece. That's what he is arguing. The first thing you're going to do as you open up your essay booklet, you are going to go directly into the second box, identify what the argument is, keep it in your mind, and start reading the passage. As you're reading the passage, I want you to hold your pencil and underline rhetorical devices. When you see an anecdote, when you see a rhetorical question, when you see an analogy or a comparison or a concession. By the way, we will be talking about how to identify those devices and what they look like later on in the video. But as you are reading, I want you to be underlining, and then I want you to spend up to 7 minutes on reading, underlining, and deciding which 3 you're going to use. Usually my students kind of fall into 2 camps, one smaller camp and one larger camp. As they're reading the essay, the smaller camp finds so many rhetorical devices. You only need 3 because you need 3 body paragraphs. But they find so many, they end up finding 6 or 8, and then they start thinking, which ones should they include, which ones should they stay away from? There is a very simple test. You can kind of run your rhetorical devices through to make a perfect choice. First, if you found appeal to authority, for example here, the great classicist Lawrence once remarked of the Parthenon that is the one building in the world which may be assessed as absolutely right. Well, this is an example of appeal to authority, but we only see Christopher Hitchens appeal to authority once. If we only see something once, it's not recommended to highlight it as a rhetorical device that the author frequently uses. It's recommended that you are able to quote your device several times. The more you quote, the more the graders will see that you're quoting. They're also going to assess your quoting ability. By the way, I have created a separate video that talks about quoting and how you should be quoting on the SAT essay, but this is beyond the scope of this video. In this video, I'm just going to teach you the process that I taught David. Now, would you be using this, this rhetorical device? No. But Christopher Hitchens, for example, uses stats and numbers. He uses them in so many places that you have this ability to quote him at least twice. And additionally, if you have too many rhetorical devices and you have many of them that you see more than once, run them through a second test. How strongly are they driving the argument forward? You want to be using the most relevant rhetorical devices. Another example I can give you, one of the passages was about allowing children to use technology early on. And the author was arguing that it's important to give access to technology and not restrict iPhone use and tablet use. One of the things she was doing is she was humorous about it. Was that a rhetorical device? Absolutely. Was it more significant than the stats and the data that she was using to prove by how much the use of devices has exploded in the last decade? Probably not. Even though humor and sarcasm could be identified, you want to narrow it down to the main 3 that help you drive the argument forward. So here's what we're going to do. The first 7 minutes, you're going to jump here, identify the main idea. You're going to read through the passage slowly, identifying the rhetorical devices. And then 3 minutes are going to go on writing a quick and short outline. So now let's talk about the outline. I'm going to teach you the formula. So let's suppose that you have decided on 3 rhetorical devices. Rhetorical device A, B, and C. Now you're going to quickly, in 3 minutes, jot down your outline. Introduction, you will commit your introduction to memory because it will pretty much always be the same. And the last sentence will be your thesis in which you will list the rhetorical devices. Your introduction would sound something like this. The idea that Parthenon should be returned to Greece is fairly new, but its underlying aspects are often overlooked. In The Lovely Stones, which is the name of this passage, Christopher Hitchens puts forth a compelling argument for returning the ancient sculpture back to the place of its origin. You kind of said the exact same thing, but a little bit differently, and here's your thesis. In doing so, he uses powerful rhetorical devices, including, and this is where you're going to include your powerful rhetorical devices, A, B, C. This is exactly the order in which your body paragraphs are going to come. So this is your thesis, A, B, and C. You're going to decide which order. And usually, the one that's going to come first should come earlier in the text. So if you found a rhetorical device early on, somewhere here, make sure that you put it early in your body paragraphs. It's not something that you're graded on, but this is just something that I suggest because since you guys wanted a formula, I'm going to give you a formula. Now, your second paragraph is going to be your body paragraph. And I want you to use this quick acronym. I, Q, war. Remember how we used raw? Now we're going to go to war. I literally taught David to think that once he's writing his body paragraph, he's going to go to war. Once he identified his rhetorical device, you're going to go to war. War stands for writer, argument, reader. What you're graded on is analysis. Once you find a rhetorical device, let's say you found a personal anecdote. What you're going to do in your body paragraph, in the very first sentence, you're going to introduce or identify, whatever you guys like, introduce or identify the rhetorical device. Christopher Hitchens makes masterful use of a personal anecdote early on in the text. He doesn't. This is just an example. But in here, you're going to identify the device. Q stands for quote. You're going to give a quotation of this device. He says, and then you're going to use quotes, and then you're going to give a little powerful piece from that anecdote. And then war. My client David really struggled with this analyzation piece, especially if you have to do it on the fly. So this is what we decided. War is writer, argument, reader. What does this device do for the writer? What does it do for the argument? And what does it do for the reader? Each body paragraph should have at least 6 to 7 sentences. So what are you going to write about? Okay, he uses an anecdote, and this is what the anecdote looks. It makes him drive the argument forward. In order to have some sort of a structured way, I want you to think about going to war. What does this personal anecdote do for the writer? The writer becomes more relatable. What does this personal anecdote do for the argument? The argument is now grounded in reality. What does this personal anecdote do for the reader? The reader now feels more related, perhaps. Or maybe the reader now can have a vivid imagery that highlights the extent of a problem. So when you're introducing a rhetorical device, I want you to always think introduce, quote, then go to war. What does it do for the writer? What does it do for the argument? What does it do for the reader? Then what you can do is you then can quote again. If, let's say you have 2 quotes, and then you're going to quote, and then again you're going to go to war. This is another quote, and what does this particular quote do for the writer? What does it do for the argument? And what does it do for the reader? And then you can use a transition, or you don't have to, and then you write your third body paragraph. Your third body paragraph is going to say, just as masterful or just as persuasive as A, so is B. That's kind of your transition sentence in which you also introduce, and then you're going to quote, and then you're going to go to war. And then you're going to quote again, and then you're going to go to war. And then you're going to go into your third body paragraph, but that's your fourth paragraph in the essay. You're going to say lastly, and then you're going to introduce again, you're going to quote, and then you're going to go to war. And then you're going to write your fifth conclusion. And in conclusion, you're going to say that such and such author made the case for returning the lovely stones or the Parthenon sculptures back to Greece using ABC. And then the second sentence is going to say something along the lines of, it's not only very convincing, but also it propels the reader into action. That's it. So what you're doing when you're doing your outline, you're writing these, and then you just jot down what the device is and what does it do for the writer, for the author, and then for the writer, for the argument, and the reader. Writer, argument, reader. What you're graded on heavily is whether you tie your examples back to the main idea. Okay, the author is using a lot of juxtaposition, but how does it make the essay, how does it make the passage or the argument more persuasive? That's something you need to be looking for. Now I think it's time for us to talk about different types of persuasive devices, and I'll give you 10. I will teach you a mnemonic device, which will help you remember all 10. Now, let's talk about persuasive devices now. So now let's talk about rhetorical devices. When I'm thinking about rhetorical devices, I can probably think about 25 at the top of my head. But hey, I'm a tutor, I'm a nerd, and I love rhetorical devices and I love poetry. For you guys, and especially because your thinking battery will be depleted by the time you get to the essay, you need your basics. And if you're a prolific writer, you shouldn't be probably watching this video anyway. This is for someone who has been procrastinating till the last moment and just getting into this now. I want you to use this mnemonic device. I want you to imagine jars J-A-R-S, jars. And think about 3 jars, and it's kind of a concession stand. It says concessions, and there are 3 jars. The first jar has M&Ms in it, candy, and it has words written on it. The second jar has potato peel, and the third jar has an orange peel. And you're just standing there and you're trying to analyze and compare. So you're comparing and drawing analogies between the 3 jars. This is going to help you remember the 10 persuasive devices. Let me list them now. Juxtaposition, anecdote, rhetorical devices, statistics and data, concessions, strong word choice, appeal to identity, and then appeal to authority, and comparisons and analogies. Here's how it works. JARS, that's just an acronym. Juxtaposition. What was the second one? It's anecdotes, rhetorical devices, and statistics and data. Then concession stand, so it's concessions. If you don't know what concessions are, I'll get to that. And then there are 3 jars. One jar has words in it, M&Ms with words, so strong word choice. You can almost always find a strong word choice. Then 2 appeals, appeal to identity and appeal to authority. Let's think that appeal to identity would be potato, because some people either love potato or they hate it. So potato is like their identity. So appeal to identity, and then appeal to authority. Now, let's go over each and every one of them. And for each and every one of them, let's go to war. Let's fill out that WAR acronym. What does it do for the writer? What does it do for the argument? Or what does it do for the reader? Obviously, you're going to be using your own examples. I'm just going to give you some hints, some words that you can use. I'm going to give you just a little bit of the formula. Now, let's begin with juxtaposition. Juxtaposition is a fantastic device to find. You can almost always find it. That's number 1. Number 2 is a long word. Will probably impress the graders. Make sure you know how to spell it. Juxtaposition is juxta, and then just like the way you spell the word position, like gangsta position, juxtaposition. So juxtaposition is when you put 2 things that normally don't go together, you put them next to each other. The light and the darkness, the beauty and the beast, the statistic from one country to statistic to another country. You're not comparing, you're just putting them next to each other. And by juxtaposing, the writer usually becomes more engaging. The writer is now having his reader surprised. The writer is now becomes more convincing. Now, what does the juxtaposition do for the argument? Let's say you're juxtaposing 2 statistics from 2 different countries. You shock the reader, but you make it very apparent. You make something very vivid. You highlight the degree of something. And human beings are really good at thinking about something when there's something else in the background. So by juxtaposing such and such, he creates a contrast and builds on the contrast. So this is what the writer does. This is what it do for the argument. Now, what does it do for the reader? The reader is now surprised. The reader is now more engaged and more compelled to side with the author. Now, let's talk about personal anecdote. What can a personal anecdote do for the writer? We kind of did talk about that in the previous section. So the writer becomes more relatable. Now, the argument is now grounded in reality. What does it do for the reader? The reader now has a vivid image of an event that happened that proves or highlights or underscores or emphasizes or mentions the issue. Now, the next one is our rhetorical question. In rhetorical questions, there are 3 different types, and you kind of want to identify what the author is trying to do if you have 2 rhetorical questions in your passage. If there's just one, I think that wouldn't be as easy to use and say that the author frequently uses rhetorical questions if there's just one. But if you have several, pay attention what function do these rhetorical questions play. Are they humorous? Are they obvious? Or are they reflective? If the rhetorical question is obvious, that means this is something that the author shares with the reader. For example, when would corruption cease? That's a rhetorical question where the answer is obvious. By doing that, what does it do for the writer? The writer now becomes more relatable. Again, it's all about being related. We usually believe people that we are related to. What does it do for the argument? The argument is now more convincing because if the author and the reader agree on something, now the reader is more likely to side with the author on other things. So you're kind of, by including this rhetorical question with an obvious answer, you are now preparing the groundwork for yourself to build on. Now let's talk about a rhetorical question that's humorous. You may, what can it do for, let's go to war with a humorous rhetorical question. What can the humorous rhetorical question do for the writer? It can make the writer more engaging. It can make the writer more fun. What does it do for the argument? Let's say the argument's very serious, and now the argument's more lightened. Now it's more entertaining. Now, what does it do for the reader? The reader is more likely to engage because somebody has lightened up the topic of air conditioner or electricity use. Now it's more fun. Now, what can a reflective rhetorical question do? A reflective rhetorical question, what can it do for the writer? It can engage his audience. He can prompt his audience to think about a serious question. What does it do for the argument? The argument becomes more engaging. What does it do for the reader? The reader is now prompted to answer a serious question. When we reflect on something, now we're more likely to engage and understand. Nice. Now, in the jars, we had S, which is statistics and data. What can presenting statistics and data do for the writer? It can make the writer look more researched. It can make the writer look more prepared. Like, the writer really knows what he's talking about. What can statistics and data do for the argument? The argument is now indisputable. If it's grounded in facts, now it's indisputable. What can statistics and data do for the reader? It will make them more compelled to side with the author. Maybe statistics surprise the reader, or they entertain the reader. Oh, I didn't know that this many people watch television. It's all, you can tweak these examples based on the situation, but if you have presented the rhetorical device, you've quoted it, and you don't know what else to talk about, having this war thing is really, really important. Now let's talk about concessions. If you guys don't know what concessions are little sentences in the passage where the author acknowledges an opposing viewpoint. There was a vivid example of this, and SAT does know about concessions, and they love using them. A vivid example of it was in the passage about air conditioners, that we should reduce, Americans should reduce their use of air conditioners. And the author was giving a concession. He was conceding. By the way, if you don't know what concede means, one of my clients created this really cool memory trick to remember what the word concede means. He said, it kind of sounds like, I can see it. Concede, I can see it. Concede means unwillingly agree. If you concede to something, it's not the best choice for you, but okay, you've convinced me, I concede. So concession is just a noun from the verb concede, and when you give concessions, you agree with an opposing side. What does that do for the writer? That makes the writer more researched, first and foremost. It makes the writer more understanding. It makes the writer more related to the reader. In that example, the writer said, I understand that air conditioners bring a lot of great things to the hospitals, people that have medical conditions that really don't feel well during hot summer days. I understand that there's a lot of great amazing benefits, that there are a lot of great amazing benefits of walking in the hot summer and then on the street and then walking into a cool environment. I understand. So by doing that, what does it do for the argument? The argument can now look more researched, more developed, and it could now go further. It can now go beyond those kind of surface objections. What does it do for the reader? The reader now is kind of prepared. The way for him to move in the argument is now paved. So the writer paves the way for the reader to move beyond existing ideas or existing preconceived ideas and transcend into new viewpoints. That's concessions. One of my favorites so far are juxtapositions and concessions. And if you find one, make sure you write about it. Now, let's talk about strong word choice. Strong word choice is easy to find anytime the author calls something visceral or uses an interesting word. Don't just say word choice, because the author, I guarantee you the author was choosing his or her words when writing. Say strong word choice. And give a couple of examples. Now, strong word choice, what does it do for the reader? What does it do for the writer? For the writer, it demonstrates their craft. It expresses their emotion. It provides a particular connotation. For the argument, it makes it more sharp, more vivid. For the reader, now the reader is is able to create this vivid imagery in their mind because of the strong word choice. Now we have two more jars left. Appeal to identity is first. Identity is something that all the readers share. Oftentimes we have appeal to identity, which is an American identity. In one of the paragraphs, in one of the passages, the author was using a lot of appeals to identity, saying that now the American youth is not reading enough, which means they're not going to be able to read the Constitution. And it's important for an American person that an American citizen is reading the Constitution, which is appealing to their identity. That's what appeal to identity is. What does it do for the writer? The writer is now more relatable. What does it do for the argument? The argument is now more urgent. The argument is now more engaging. What does it do for the reader? It makes the reader more engaged. It makes the reader be a part of the problem. If their identity is crossed or compromised, now they are a part of a problem and a part of a solution. Now, we have one more appeal. We have one more jar. Appeal to authority. Appeal to authority is something that students use a lot, and if you don't have to, I would recommend that you don't use appeal to authority, just because it's so frequently used. A thin analysis, in my opinion, would say one rhetorical device was word choice, another rhetorical device was statistics and data, and the third rhetorical device was appeal to identity, appeal to authority. Those three are used most frequently, and in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, it kind of thins the analysis. I've never seen an essay. I haven't seen thousands of essays in my life, but from the essays that I saw, I've never seen someone who would just use these three: strong word choice, statistics and data, and appeal to authority, and get a high score on their analysis. I've never seen anything above 7. So if you don't have to, don't. But here's what appeal to authority is. When you're using other institutions, or let's say you're quoting that the UN is looking into adopting your idea, you're appealing to their authority. You're validating the argument. That's what it does for the argument. For the author, it makes him more credible. And what does it do for the reader? It justifies their siding with the author. It kind of like, well, if the UN is doing it, then I'm going to do that as well. So it justifies their persuasion now. We also have comparison and analogy. Comparison and analogy is a powerful device, which what it does for the writer, it helps the writer communicate his idea. We have this example in this particular passage where the author draws an analogy. There has been a bitter argument about the legitimacy of the British Museum's deal. I've written a whole book about this controversy and won't impress you with all the details. Again, appeal to authority. I've written the whole book. But wouldn't just make this one point. If Mona Lisa, that's the beginning of the analogy, had been sawed in two, if Mona Lisa had been sawed in two during the Napoleonic War, and the separated halves have been acquired by different museums in, say, St. Petersburg and Lisbon, would there not be a general wish to see that they might look like if reunited? He is basically explaining his complicated idea about the sculptures of Parthenon being reunited using an analogy with Mona Lisa. What if we were to saw Mona Lisa mistakenly in half during the war, and the halves were now separated in two different museums? Wouldn't there be a desire to connect Da Vinci's piece together? Of course there would be. So the author is now simplifying his argument and helping his reader understand. Because once the reader understands something more simple, now they can transfer that knowledge onto something that's more difficult. So that's comparison and analogy. And then lastly are your symbolic devices, like simile and the metaphor and hyperbole and impersonification, personification, not impersonification. If you are very comfortable with those, absolutely use them. But use the same framework that I've suggested. Introduce it, quote it, and then go to war. What does it do for the writer? What does it do for the argument? And then what does it do for the reader? And then quote it again. But if you are uncertain what a simile is, what a metaphor is, and what hyperbole is, do not spend time tonight finding those. You're not going to get extra points. From the ones that I've listed, the jars with concessions and the 3 jars, one is with words, one is with peel of potato, one is with peel with oranges, which is appeal to authority, appeal to identity, and strong word choice, you should be able to find 3 really strong persuasive elements. So don't worry about the symbolic devices. There's obviously more. And one other framework that you can keep in mind when you're thinking about rhetorical devices, you can think about the logos, pathos, and ethos. If you know what those are, amazing. If you kind of know what those are, try not to use those words. And by the way, if you have a hard time remembering what logos, pathos, and ethos are, I made a separate video, again, a mnemonic device that will help you remember the difference between the 3 for the rest of your life. Don't watch it today, watch it next time if you're taking the SAT essay tomorrow. But if you are very familiar and comfortable with pathos, ethos, and logos, make sure you mention these parts in your analytical essay. According to Greek philosophers, a perfect persuasive speech or perfect argument would contain all 3. And if it doesn't have logos, if it doesn't have pathos, if it doesn't have ethos, the argument would lose. And before we close, I want you to kind of ask yourself, what did you just learn? What are the 3 categories that you're going to be tested on? Reading, analysis, and writing. What are the rhetorical devices that you learned today? Jars with concessions, and then 1 jar with words, 1 jar with potato peel, and 1 jar with orange peel. Let's list them together. First one was juxtaposition. The second one is anecdote. The third one was rhetorical devices. The fourth one was statistics and data. Then there was concessions. Then we had strong word choice. Then we had appeal to identity. And then we had appeal to authority. And then the last 2 are you're standing there and you're analyzing and then you're comparing, which is comparison and analogy. And the very last one was symbolic devices like metaphor, simile, and hyperbole and such. Also, tell me how you should be structuring your body paragraph. Your body paragraph should have IQ, war, Q, war. I stands for identify, so there should be a sentence that will help you identify the rhetorical device. In The Lovely Stones, Christopher Hitchens makes masterful use of personal anecdotes. He begins his use of anecdotes in his discussion of, and then you say where it is, and then you give a quote. According to Christopher Hitchens, comma, definitely watch the quotation video, and after you've quoted, you want to say, what does it do for the writer? What does it do for the argument? And what does it do for the reader? After 3-4 sentences, you can quote again. And then you can go to war again. What does it do for the writer? What does it do for the author? What does it do for the reader? I hope this helped you, and I'm excited for you to get a really high score on your SAT essay. Don't forget to comment. Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you learned. What is your favorite rhetorical device? I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.